What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about qualified immunity. Now, this conversation was motivated by Tim Scott coming out last week. I spoke at the RNC. He spoke about how he worked on criminal justice reform and that was obstructed by the Democrats. And it was a really interesting question because as we see President Trump start to reframe his campaign and start targeting the violence, now announcing that he's going to be heading to Kenosha, I think tomorrow, the message of law and order is where he's pushing his campaign. And it's so ironic because you would think that Joe Biden, given his criminal justice record, specifically, he could probably make a pretty good case for why he would be an even better law and order candidate. But the issue that is that where his party has aligned itself versus where he has been in the past, these things are now in conflict. And it's like he could abandon the message of unity with the black community and asking for criminal justice reform and say, hey, look, I'm the guy who architected the 94 crime bill. Like, I'm the guy who's always been tough on this. I've always supported police unions. He could make that argument, but he's not going to, obviously. It's just a really interesting thing. And I still think, man, this race, I think Saturday I had an epiphany, and I think Joe Biden might actually lose. I think Joe Biden is going to lose. If Donald Trump could memorize his speeches, because his speeches, they have facts in them. If he could memorize his speeches and deliver them with the same cadence that he delivers his regular off-the-cuff press conferences, he would make such a phenomenal argument against, Joe Biden specifically, not necessarily giving control of the country over Democrats, but just Joe Biden is just such an awful candidate that he's honestly just flawed. He's really stuck in the middle between who he could be and where he is. But I want to talk about qualified immunity specifically because, Tim Scott brought this up. He said it was obstructed. But qualified immunity is basically what the police officers are using. It protects them. It allows them to not be held liable for things that happen in the line of duty. So then when they do have these instances of a shooting or something like that, they can't be held personally liable. It protects them. So this is a really critical piece of doctrine that shields the police from all types of personal liability. But if Joe Biden, President Trump has come out specifically and said he does not support eradicating this particular doctrine, which is important because, again, even though you might disagree with President Trump, at least he states where he stands. I think it's when you have principles, it's very easy to just say, well, that's a yes or no for me. But when you're somebody who is constantly, we could say grifting, we could say pandering, we could say someone who's just insincere, we don't know what you're going to say, and then we really don't know what you're going to do because you're willing to say anything. So I want to give you guys a background. Again, qualified immunity is a big topic. I've been looking at this for like the last several days to try to get ready for this video because I was like, okay, this is still super sketchy, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a legal expert, but I just want you to know that when you are looking at a candidate who is talking about criminal justice reform, if they're not talking about this specific piece, then you know that they're not really serious about major reform, or at least, but at the same time, I think, again, someone says in the comments, is one party pretending to be two, or vice versa. Did I read that right? They're pretty much stuck. I think either party is stuck because they're all in alignment with police unions, and they want to maintain that relationship. They want to maintain those funds that come in. So I don't think you're really going to see anything significant, and that's kind of what we're going to go through. So let me get to reading because this is a little bit lengthy, but it's not super. It's kind of interesting. So this is the history of qualified immunity. During Reconstruction, actually, let me go to the big monitor because this is all right. During Reconstruction following the Civil War, Congress created a simple law that made it easy for Americans to demand government follow the Constitution and the laws of the land. That law, known as 42 U.S. Section 1983 Civil Action for Deprivation of Rights, says that every government official who, under the color of law, that is, while doing their government job, violates someone's constitutional statutory rights, shall be liable, must pay damage to a person who suffers from that injury. In other words, if a government worker violates someone's constitutional rights in their role as a government official, they must pay that person for the damage caused. Now, this is what If you go a few months ago, prior to Tim Scott's Justice Act, the Democrats proposed, it is called the Justice in Police Act of 2020, which did remove the protections of qualified immunity. My question is, was that a sincere move? Is that something that they truly support? Because as we're going to come to find out, I don't think that Joe Biden supports getting rid of qualified immunity. So any statement that would say, oh, the Republicans didn't go far enough with their measure is kind of insincere, because I don't think you truly support the measure that was proposed by your camp either way. This law was in response to a widespread harassment of freed slaves, and Congress making it clear that it would no longer allow such harassment in the United States in 1983, effectively enforcing the promises set out in the Bill of Rights and Reconstruction Amendments. They are no longer just empty words on paper. Despite the law's simplicity and power, in 1982, Supreme Court decision called Harlow versus Fitzgerald, the court created qualified immunity, a ruling that government officials, including law enforcement officers, can be sued for damages for violating someone's rights only if, this is the key, because this is the cluster that it means they're never going to get prosecuted, only if the violation is clearly established. Basically, for an official to be held accountable, it must be objectively clear to any reasonable person that what he or she was doing was wrong. While that might not sound nefarious in its face, in practical terms, qualified immunity means that in almost all cases, if a government agent violates someone's property rights, freedom of speech, or even physically injures them, the government agent cannot be held liable for damages, that is money, unless there is an existing legal precedent that that person can point to showing the exact specific action is illegal for government agents. The government abuse that qualified immunity enables can range from excessive government fines from overzealous regulators to violence in the hands of irresponsible police officers. So they're just going to give a couple of examples here, just so you can see. This is a wide range. This is not just police shooting people. This is a big. This is a nice little security blanket. Qualified immunity has led to absurd government abuses. For example, in California, police use qualified immunity as a defense for stealing $225,000 in cash and rare coins from someone's bedroom while executing a search warrant. The 3-judge panel held that while theft may be morally wrong, the officer should not be sued because the Ninth Circuit had never specifically considered the issue, and therefore the right not to have police steal your property while executing a search warrant was not clearly established in that jurisdiction. Ain't that something? Other qualified immunity abuses include cases like Baxter versus Bracey, where police use qualified immunity to defend deploying a police dog against a suspect who had already surrendered and was sitting on the ground while his hands were up. The Supreme Court is considered hearing Baxter this coming term. There's also a case, PLF explains, weighs in from New Jersey, in which the local tax collector in qualified immunity to avoid liability, refusing to allow a homeowner to pay the back taxes on his house, despite being required by law to do so. Because the tax collector refused to accept the payment, the homeowner lost his home. I don't know what that was, but sorry, that's the boring stuff. We're going to move on. We got videos, we got visual aids, but I just wanted to give you guys a background because, again, when you hear Biden get up there, because he's going to eventually have to come out the basement, make a couple of speeches, and he may specifically be asked about qualified immunity. He may not, because I think that, the way he's being shielded, they're really keeping the hard questions from him. So in order to even find an answer from about Joe Biden's position on qualified immunity, I had to kind of decipher pieces and statements. There's no specific statement where he says, or at least I couldn't find one where he says, I want to do this. Moving on, let's go to Simone Sanders. She is going to speak on Joe Biden's behalf. This is from August 26th. And when I ask if Joe Biden supports qualified immunity, all I get from her is that it should be reined in, quote unquote, reined in. I don't know what that means. Again, this is like when I ask you, what's your policy on ending systemic racism? Like that's not a bill, bro. I need something. You need to tell me specifically. What does reined in mean? Define reined in. What does that mean in terms of dollars? What does that mean in terms of specific damages?
Departments that do not make the changes, that do not uphold the standards, they will not be prioritized for funding. No, absolutely not. But we are going to give police departments the resources that they need to do their jobs. I just want to know, Joy, I just watched the press conference, and the Kenosha pardon me, in the attorney general in Wisconsin said that the officers were not wearing body cameras. Body cameras are not the answer to all of everyone's issues, but perhaps cameras in this case could make a difference. So the reality is that we want to give resources to police departments that they need, but we are also going to hold police departments accountable. And as it relates to qualified immunity, because I want to answer your question.
Right. Okay, good. I was going to get you there. I was going to walk you.
You see how she did that? That whole diatribe before actually specifically even getting to the phrase qualified immunity. This is radically similar to back when we were talking about Andrew Yang and whether or not he supports whatever the universal healthcare thing is called, Medicare for all. Like, your vagueness, your vagueness is not, that is very intentional, right? This is a person who is representing Joe Biden who is specifically dancing around answering that question, because what she's trying to do initially is distance herself or the camp from the phrase defund the police, right? Because, again, this is Joe Biden's vulnerability. It's like, you can be the law and order guy, but you're going to alienate all these people you've kind of tried to make your base. But now she's going to go on. She's going to specifically state something very vague.
Right on to it, but you came right to it.
I wasn't going to skip out on you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'm like, she wants the qualified immunity answer.
I do.
There's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. Let me be very clear. Vice President Biden believes that qualified immunity needs to be significantly reined in. He believes that abuses of power should not currently be covered by qualified immunity. And take chokeholds, for example. Okay, that is an abuse of power. And that is not something that should be covered. Now, we know that there's currently a bill by Hakeem Jeffries in the United States Congress that would ban chokeholds. That is a bill that Vice President Biden supports. But yes, we need to do something about qualified immunity as it currently stands. It is way too expansive.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC.
What? Yeah, we need to do something about it. So is that you want to end it or no? Because I don't think you answered the question. I mean, that was a nice little tap dance move, but I just want you to know, when in a few days when the Democrats are trying to, they're going at Trump and they're saying he didn't push for meaningful criminal justice reform. Joe Biden, the people's champ, also not supporting the measure that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats push for in getting rid of qualified immunity. So I don't know what his position is, but I'm going to read you guys a little bit of information about Joe Biden's background. Again, we know Joe Biden. Joe Biden is for real law and order. Like, he's not just a guy who's talking about it. He's really been in those streets. No, seriously. And let's recap. A tripartisan. Now, this is this is August. A tripartisan push is underway to change Representative Justin Amash from Michigan and Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. They introduced a bill recently to end the doctrine entirely. Though the GOP has been slower to warm to the subject, Senator Mike Braun crafted his own legislation that would radically alter qualified immunity. Now, remember I gave you there's that big, I said this is the linchpin of qualified immunity. Well, this guy wants to actually flip it around. So what he wants to do is he wants to allow officials to invoke it only when relevant case law, federal legislation, federal statutes, and other state statutes specifically permit the conduct in question, essentially reversing the current approach in which officials are held liable only if the way they violated your rights has been described with exacting detail in previous case law. So where does Biden fall on the issue? It's not completely clear. We'll also act to ensure that victims of federal, state, and local officials' abuse of power can seek justice through civil litigation by reining in the qualified immunity doctrine to increase police accountability to task force's recommendations. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. That's not specific. That's not telling you why I should vote for you over the guy who's telling me he's definitely not going to do it. Because if you're definitely not going to do it and you're just not telling me, then I might want to choose based on my economic or what benefits me economically, or maybe I'm worried about my property, because if I know you're not doing anything about criminal justice reform, maybe I should focus on the other issues which you're not that great on, and that makes you vulnerable. And again, we're talking about a very close race where we're looking at swing states, we're looking at independent voters, and if you're not doing something to remedy this, then it makes me say, okay, well, if we're equal on that issue, what's different? Because the other things you're not better than Donald Trump at. Biden's hesitance here isn't surprising in context of his attempt to be middle of the road modus operandi, but even the Democratic House police reform bill proposed eradicate the village. Yeah, so they're talking about how the House of Democrats did propose a bill that would eradicate this, but we don't have a statement where Joe Biden says this is the action that he supports. He was on the front lines of a years-long effort to pass a federal police officers' Bill of Rights, which would have made it considerably more difficult to investigate police misconduct internally, though the bill never became a law as a standalone piece of legislation. An altered version was included in the Biden-Thurman Violent Crime Control Act. Just 5 years ago, Biden was lauding his '94 crime bill at a dinner for the National Association of Police Organizations, a group of police unions and related associations. There wouldn't have been a Biden crime bill, he said in May 2015. There wouldn't have been a crime bill that put 100,000 cops on the streets in the first place were it not for the fact that from the very beginning, NAPO was the staunchest advocate for it. But that group doesn't seem any happier with Biden's compromises than criminal justice reformers are. For Biden, police are shaking their heads because he used to be a stand-up guy who backed law enforcement. So that's the problem. He's alienated that base, chose this other one, and the thing is, he could really plead that case as well, but he's got to choose one. So we're going to move on. Let's go over to Tim Scott because, Tim Scott's the man of the hour. And like I said, I'm not a leftist. I'm fairly conservative, but I'm black. So that makes me conflicted on certain things. I have to think about, things bigger than myself. But Tim Scott, Republican, like I said, he spoke at the RNC. He out of South Carolina after the Democrats proposed their Justice Reform Act 2020. They came back and they proposed something that didn't get rid of qualified immunity. And let's go ahead and play his clip because it gives us a little bit of insight as to the depth of their conversation. Like, where is this thing at, and where does the power lie regarding getting actual police reform to come about? Because if things aren't changing, again, it goes back to the power of these police unions. If that body is that powerful, then what change can you really expect to come from either side? 131. This fly is driving me crazy.
To be in the bill that you're working on?
Well, there are three major parts of it. We have to have all the information. Today, only 40% of law enforcement departments are actually providing information to the DOJ. We need 100% as it relates to serious bodily injury and death. When the officer uses force, we need to have all the information. I've been working on this, Margaret, for 5 years. The second thing we have to do is look at training and tactics. If we do that, we can certainly de-escalate the situation and make sure that the officer and the suspect go home. And then the third part of it is officer misconduct. If we can drill into officer misconduct, we do it on the local level. House has been talking about doing it on the state level. The president's executive order talks about doing it on a national level.
Officer misconduct, you've been talking about having information sharing when it comes to hiring. But what about the firing? Democrats in particular emphasize that reducing qualified immunity, making it easier to fire bad cops, needs to be in legislation. Are you open to that?
Well, there are two ways that you could deal with that. From the Republican perspective, and the president has sent the signal that qualified immunity is off the table. They see that as a poison pill. On our side, we could use the decertification of officer, except for the law enforcement unions say that's a poison pill. So we're going to have to find a path that helps us reduce misconduct within the officers. But at the same time, we know that any poison pill in legislation means we get nothing done. That sends a wrong signal, perhaps the worst signal right now in America. I think we're going to have legislation that can be negotiated, that gets us to the place where something becomes law that actually makes a difference. That's got to be our goal.
So to be clear, you personally would be open to reducing immunity but not removing it completely?
No, I think there's a way for us to deal with it. Decertification would be a path that I would be interested in looking at. That is a path that has got a roadblock because I don't have the votes on the other side to make that into law. If we do it right, I think we can reduce the number of times that we're dealing with misconduct on the police departments. If we don't do it right, then we'll have the same situation where there is no law. We can do better than that as a nation.
So I just give that to you because, again, I want you to see where the power lies, where the dynamics are. And when you hear the phrase poison pill, that means that ain't happening. So if we know the president is not supporting this, if we know, or he's not supporting getting rid of qualified immunity, if we know that police unions are going to be pushing for it, and we know that if nothing happens and we just keep doing what we've been doing and we have violence in the streets, I think it's fair to say what is common sense reform. Now, I know some people don't like incremental change, and I get that. But this seems to be just a politicized move where it's like, okay, well, actually, there's another clip where I'm not going to play it, but Scott comes out and says, well, this is obviously being obstructed because of who it's coming from. It's because it's coming from, if it's coming from the right, it's because it's coming from, so, it's supported by Donald Trump. So that is what the obstruction is. It's not because it doesn't make sense. And obviously, I feel like there's a conflict regarding the police unions on either side. So I don't think that Joe Biden truly supports getting rid of qualified immunity himself. So what kind of police reform can you really expect if you're also not in support of the significant measure that completely changes the landscape of whether or not someone can be held liable for things that occur in these types of situations? I mean, we don't see medical professionals really getting qualified immunity. If you're somebody who's if you're a soldier and you're fighting a war, you don't have qualified immunity. I think it's interesting that police need to have this, but that's based on the idea that their job is extremely dangerous. And while one would argue, they're putting themselves in that situation, that's kind of the job that you sign up for. You are supposed to be putting your life on the line. You're not supposed to be making sure that, that you make it home safe. You're supposed to be making sure that, regular Americans make it home safe. And that's the job that you take. Now, if you say that, therefore, you should be paid more, I don't have any problems with you saying you should be paid more to do the job. But it seems unreasonable to ask for something from the other side of the aisle that your camp does not truly support. And when you're talking about taking over the country and making radical changes to reenact the law and order, to get a system where police are going to be held accountable, I need you to specify that you're supporting something that actually makes that possible. By being vague and unclear as to what your intentions are, it really leaves the door open for nothing to really change and us to have just a change in administration. Now, as of this is early August, I believe. Where do the American people stand on qualified immunity? Now, again, this is one of those weird policies because it means everything, but it's also like people are unclear about it. So I want to give you proper context of these numbers. Nearly 2/3 of Americans that support eliminating qualified immunity so that police officers can be sued for misconduct, even if there's no previous legal case with similar facts that ruled officers not engaged in that context. So that actually goes back to the Mike Braun, the legislation that he is proposing. 37% oppose ending qualified immunity, and nearly half, 47% of Americans say they've heard about qualified immunity, while 53% say they have not. So again, this is what I'm saying. I want to give you proper context. I'm not just going to get up here and give you that number and say, 63% of Americans support it. No, 47% of Americans say they've heard about it, but 53 say they have not. So most Americans are not even familiar with this phrase. So that is a huge barrier to even making people understand the complexity of this issue and what needs to happen in order to get, the change that you're asking for. Those who have not heard about qualified immunity are more in favor of ending it, 69% in favor, compared to those who have not heard about it, 58%. So again, just a little background behind those numbers, where they come from, and what that truly means. Now, we covered the bill. Again, I just want to show you guys Joe Biden, his response. Again, he's not going to specifically state his position on qualified immunity. So this is the only clip I have. Let's see, 306. There is a question about, she's asking him about the House Democrats' bill on police justice reform, which, you know, preceded the Tim Scott bill. So their bill does have removal of qualified immunity, so this is important. But he doesn't specifically get asked that question. He's just asked what he does support in relation to that bill. I'll just play the question. I know it's a little convoluted. Give me a second.
Policing. Oh, well, I tell you what, I've laid out a whole plan to how I would do that. Number one, you have to start off by insisting that the police departments meet a national standard of what constitutes policing that is appropriate. And all police departments are going to have to adopt it. We'll put together a commission to do that. Secondly, we have to make sure that you have police officers who, in fact, when they act inappropriately, are, in fact, not only fired, but held accountable if it's a criminal offense, and be held accountable for that offense. Thirdly.
Okay, that was really in response to qualified immunity. But he, again, didn't state. I have his surrogate saying, you know, that he supports reining it in. We don't have a clear answer. And that is the question. Does Joe Biden, will he end qualified immunity? For all intents and purposes and everything I could find here, the answer is no. He's not going to end qualified immunity. So what he's going to do significantly different on criminal justice reform, I don't know. He supports gathering numbers. He supports all these basic things. He supports banning chokeholds. But he doesn't support the measure, the single most important measure on making significant change. You know, he's talked about withholding federal funds for police departments that don't, you know, comply with whatever the standards are. So did Tim Scott's bill. Like the basic stuff is the same as what Tim Scott's proposing bill-wise, but without that piece, I don't know that Joe Biden can even state that he's going to be any better on criminal justice reform unless he's just going to flat out say that he's being insincere right now and that he doesn't truly believe the things that he's stating, and that perhaps he will. I mean, if we look at his track record, we would think that he probably would be somebody who would be more aggressive when it comes to, or he'd be less aggressive when it comes to police reform, because that's just the way he's voted, you know, historically. That's just what he's done. So to take this new position of I'm going to be somebody who is sensitive and who is looking to do things a little bit differently without significant legislation outlining specifically what you want to do, I can't believe that you're serious. So I just want to read this comment because this is kind of where I want to leave it. Gilly says, we need qualified immunity in all government. I'm curious. Why do you think so? Why do we need qualified immunity? I mean, you're saying we need to allow police officers to not be held liable for violating someone's rights. Okay, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're stating. I want to know why you would agree with that. If that's what you're stating, I want to hear what you guys think. If this is what is your position on this? Does qualified immunity matter to you? Is it something that you're familiar with? Do you think that they should have this exemption? And is this going to be something that you're looking for when it comes to criminal justice reform? Can we reach meaningful criminal justice reform without having this specific measure removed? I personally would say I don't think we have much of a choice. I think that Joe Biden offers this fantasy that you're going to be able to get to a place that's different without making that huge step. And he can't promise to make that step because he's in the same boat as the Republicans are when it comes to being kind of handcuffed when it comes to police unions. I mean, they're incredibly powerful, and they're not going to support something like that. And neither is our current president. And I think that even if Joe Biden was the president, we'd be in the same situation. So, especially when you consider the state of things right now, when you consider we have, literal riots in the streets, I don't think at this particular time you're going to see that come up, because while people want unrest in, while people are aware of, or people are concerned about, matters of racial justice or whatever. Again, we had the conversation a few days ago. People care more about their personal property than they do racism. Like, that's not, that's cool. That's a thing, but personal property is something that they can specifically identify for, or at least most Americans can specifically identify with. You're going to get a lot more people willing to have a response to that than racism that may or may not affect them. So with that said, I would love to hear what you guys think. That's where we are. Again, Scott responded to Pelosi and Democrats. Nothing changed. Here we are months later. Joe Biden, he's still in the basement. President Trump says he's going to offer law and order. We have this battle going on, and it's all because Joe Biden really doesn't seem to have principles when it comes to this sort of thing. And it's going to make it extremely difficult for him to get up on a debate stage and have a conversation with Donald Trump back and forth about why his record reflects what it is and why he's not being more aggressive to stop protests and the violence and the rioting and the death that's occurring in these cities. And I don't think he's going to be able to overcome that. So unless something significant happens, I'm going to expect to see significant numbers start to go in the favor of Donald Trump, unless we have some other big mass event or some big event that occurs that, make people respond. Oh, that's right. The people get reminded. That's right. That's who Donald Trump is. That's why he's inept. That's why he's not qualified, because I don't really see Joe Biden as any more qualified than Donald Trump at this, sadly. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. If you guys like this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next